everyone, welcome. My name is Laura Buska and I'm a Senior Manager here at Root-Pike Watershed Initiative Network. We're your local environmental nonprofit. We work to restore, protect, and sustain the watersheds of the Root-Pike Basin. We're really thankful that you could be here with us tonight to hear about the upcoming restoration plan for the Kenosha Rearing Pond and the surrounding environment. So today we have the Executive Director of Root-Pike WIN here with us, Dave Giordano, who's going to share a bit more about the iconic Pike River and the vision for this project. We'll hear from Jim Zonlak of the Kenosha Sportfishing and Conservation Association, and he's going to go into a bit more detail about the rearing pond itself and some of the plans for its new redesign. And then last but certainly not least, we'll hear from Anna Sunderland, who is a civil engineer with the project planning engineering firm Strand Associates. She'll be sharing the latest pond planning designs with us, which is really exciting. And should you wish to learn a little bit more about any of these organizations, I'm going to be placing into the chat box the websites for you. And after the presentation, we'll open the floor for questions and comments so that we can get to everyone. We ask that throughout the meeting to use the chat box to share those questions and comments that you have for the presenters. I will take those down and share them at the end in the order that they're received. If you're directing your question to a specific presenter, please make that known in the comments as well. And just a quick Zoom intro for anyone who's new or maybe needs a refresher, we kindly ask that you stay muted throughout the meeting. The chat box is located in the lower center part of your Zoom screen, so you can choose to chat with the entire group, or you can choose Laura at Root-Pike WIN, me in the Dropbox if you'd like to reach me solely. And if you have any tech issues, please send me a private chat box message. If you can't access that, you can give a call to 262-883-4018, and I'll put that into the chat box as well. Thank you all again for coming. And without further ado, I'm going to pass this fishing pole to the Executive Director of Root-Pike WIN, Mr. Dave Giordano.
Thank you very much, Laura, and thank you to everybody on our virtual meeting today. This project's kind of been a long time coming, and what I'm going to do is kind of give you an overview of the project, our vision for this area, some of the particulars, and then we're going to ask Jim Zonlak of the Kenosha Sportfishing and Conservation Club to talk about the rearing pond itself. And then at the end, Anna Sutherland is going to talk about some of the details of our conceptual design for this area. Right. So just a kind of a brief refresh, the Pike River is different than the Pike Creek. They're often confused. And so what I'm doing here is showing you a map of, this is an old map from 1893, I believe. But it gives you an idea of these two different watersheds. The South Branch runs north, the North Branch runs south, and they meet around Petrified Springs and form the main branch, which then ultimately passes by Carthage College, and then out into Lake Michigan. That is near where the rearing pond is located. We also have the Pike Creek, which flows about near Bradford High School and some small tributaries into Washington Bowl. And then it goes under pipe until it exits at the Kenosha Harbor. And that will be a discussion for another date and time. But the Pike River watershed is what they call EPA 303D listed, which means it's impaired. And it's impaired for a number of different things. These are really the main pollutants, runoff pollutants, phosphorus, sediment, nitrogen, chlorides, and E. coli. So it's in kind of bad shape. We've taken on the task to try and restore it. And again, here's our project team here. We're taking a small facet of the watershed and trying to make it better. So what we are going to talk about today is the rearing pond area, which is near the mouth of the Pike River, but we're not actually going to talk about the mouth today. It's really not part of the scope of this project. I'll just let you know that Root-Pike WIN in the city of Kenosha and the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative have begun the grant writing process to take care of the issues, or at least explore some of the issues and solutions with the mouth of the Pike River. So the rearing pond, our goal really here is to create a place where people want to be. And that includes a number of different things. And when you overlap all of those things, you get this incredible place that has improved recreational opportunities. We're going to reduce runoff. We're restoring a lot of the erosion issues near the pond site, which is a threat to the pond itself, and improving some habitat and creating a history and heritage link that a lot of people may not be aware of. So our main need, or our main issue that we're addressing with this project, is the erosion. You can kind of see here in the 1937 aerial where the stream channel is fairly straight. When you get over into 2017, various different reasons why that water backs up now and kind of creates this swirl, this eddy, and it's causing a lot of erosion to the banks where the rearing pond is located, right here. So there's a lot of runoff pollution as well. I grew up in Kenosha, spent a lot of time on these beaches. It's sad to see it in this state. And so a number of us have gotten together as part of the Root-Pike WIN initiative to try and deal with these issues. So we're going to do some things with the shoreline, mainly eradicating some invasive species and getting natives back where they have deeper root systems. We're also going to look at educational opportunities that connect people back to the heritage here, this area. You know, there are historical accounts that this area was really kind of discovered by an explorer whose horse fell in the river. And the next day he decided to take he saw a canoe by the shoreline and decided to take that upriver and thought this was an incredible place. And hence the founding of Kenosha, or the place of Pike. So there's a rich history there. There's an awesome history, and we want to be able to tell that through some interactive, some signage and things like that. It's also a very recreational area that we think can be improved, not only from a safety perspective, but an access perspective. Here you have an example of a possible canoe launch and fishing pier or fishing deck. Here is kind of a reenactment of that canoe story. And also you can see on your right, kind of how the river used to meander not too far upstream. I believe this was a late photograph from the late 1800s. So here's some of the big ideas. We want to fortify this bank, like I talked about earlier. That's really the kind of critical part of this project, but we also feel like there's an opportunity to make some other improvements. We talked about the runoff pollutants, so we've got some ideas on how to address some of those issues. And we just talked about the canoe access and fishing access, and you'll see that when Anna goes through her conceptual design. So enough of me talking. I'm going to turn it over to Jim Zondelak. He will give you kind of an overview of what's in the red area here, the rearing pond. Oh, one last thing. The design for this project is made possible by these funders. This is a public-private partnership to make this project happen. Without these funders, it would not happen. Jim?
All right, now can you hear me?
Yes, okay. We can.
All right, so a little history of the pond. The pond started in 1973. A gentleman, his name escapes me, but he tried 3 times to go with the DNR how effective a rearing pond is needed for the reproduction, or not the reproduction, but increasing fisheries for the rivers and lakes for Lake Michigan. So the club, Kenosha Sportfishing Conservation Association, was formed. So the gentleman that you're seeing on the pond, so the pond was built, there's 1,000-foot well water that comes into the pond. It is fed from a natural water base. It's the only well-driven rearing pond in all of Southeast Wisconsin and all of the entire state. In this fact, we have the only effective pond as well-driven. And also now, and back in 2010, we did the hose to your left here that you see the green hose is an imprinting program that was started. So we're on our 4th year of imprinting, and everybody says, what's an imprinting process? Well, during the rearing of these fish, that's called smolting. Smolting is where fish lose their scales and their brains imprint the water that they are reared in. So in this case, we are trying to help Mother Nature and the fish to identify to the Pike River. So when they are out in their 4-year forage out in Lake Michigan, or 3.5 to 4 years, they come back, they're looking for the water of the pike in order to come back to spawn. So the only adhere for the fish is the opening of the Pike River when it happens. But when it does happen, the fish migrate into the Pike River and looking for their spawning, go on to areas of where they feel areas of spawning. So that's where all this started. The Sportfishing Club is a private club that is all funded privately by area donations. The people that you're seeing in this picture, just to run the pump for a 4-week program is $2,800, and that's just electrical use. The rest of the money that was donated is all by volunteers, power washers, sprayers, volunteer hours, the feeding of the fish and the releasing of the fish and the cleaning up the pond for its winter hiatus for next spring. So this pond is only operated with the DNRs giving us the fish and food. The rest of it is all done by the Kenosha Sportfishing and Conservation Club, which is a club that's been around 1973. I did some numbers today. We're at 1.9 million fish reared in Kenosha since 1973, which brings anywhere from $3.5 to $4 million of tourism yearly to this area. People from all over the United States come for charter fishing. People come for shore-bait fishing. People use the hotels, the restaurants, even the area businesses of shops and all that also get visited by people from as far as Germany and all that. So what you're seeing here and the tubes you're seeing is that the fish come in from the DNR Wild Rose Hatchery, and then we keep them for 3 or 4 weeks. It depends on the DNR, but our well water is so unique. It's at 52 and 52.5 degrees consistently. Our wild water is the best water these fish could ever be reared in. So we give the fish a supplement of food that the DNR supplied us. And as we finished this year, our fish grew 1/4 inch in 3 weeks. So we had one of the healthiest rears that we ever had in a very long time, according to the DNR biologist, one of our biologists that gave us the data just recently. So our club is privately held. We go out and seek fundraising. What we feel that what brings this community closer on the pond is about the fishery, and the fishery is a beneficial, as we all know, it's nearly $1 billion industry, and it benefits the city, the Kenosha area businesses, and also not to mention the educational of what kids say and the next generation of fishermen and fisher ladies that come in and enjoy what we're doing. So at this point, that's where our Kenosha starts at. So the reason we want this to be where we're at is that we have to teach young kids and students and about where the fish come from, how do they start, where do they end up, how do they return rate, what are these fish all for? Well, the Sportfishing organization is about the community, and this is a community-driven pond. This is nothing about a bunch of people not just enjoying one thing, but it's about community, bringing people together, people enjoying the idea of that they're rearing fish that are going to come back in 3.5, 4 years, and they gave them the best opportunity that they did at the infant stage as they are. So the fingerlings left here at about 5/8 of an inch longer than when they came in at. So that's where we're at right now today. So at this point, the pond is of age, and it's been around since 73, and it's been out in the environment, and it's done very well. But if you want to keep something as prestiged as this pond is and keep the river going with the return of the salmon, this pond needs to be one of those iconic things that need to be saved, not to be saved, but more or less needs to be preserved, because the fact that this is a heartbeat of Kenosha, and without the pond and its what is happening with the local sport fishermen's organizations are, and let's just say it for what it is. It's hard to get kids and young adults involved in sport fishing just because of what all the extra electronics we have, but we are working to get children, young children, moms and dads involved out in the Great Lakes. And so that's how this all started.
Great. Jim, thanks a lot. We really appreciate what you do. And I think one of the other things to mention is that, you know, the rearing pond brings salmon to our area, Lake Michigan, but those salmon also run up the streams in southeastern Wisconsin, and the salmon that are raised here run in the Pike River and some even in the Pike Creek as well. So it's not just for charter fishing. It also creates recreational opportunities in the fall and in the spring for these river migrating fish. All right. Now we're going to turn it over to the star of the show, Anna Sutherland, who is with Strand Associates. She's the project lead for the improvements around the rearing pond. So I am going to now share my screen with you. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right.
All right. Let me know if you can all see that.
There we go. Looking good.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Dave. So I am going to be focusing on the area around the rearing pond. So where Jim talked about the pond itself, we also have ideas for the surrounding area. Like Dave mentioned, we really want to make this a place where people can come and learn about the environment and become kind of reconnected with this area that's so important to Kenosha. So the existing Kenosha Rearing Pond area presents opportunities for environmental restoration and recreational improvements that Dave kind of already touched on. I know you've all seen some photos of the site already, but we wanted to show kind of an overview site to orient everybody before we show the actual concept plan. So that rearing pond that Jim talked about is on the right side of this photo. 7th Avenue is to your left, and this photo is facing north. You can't really see it in this photo, but the Pike River is just on the other side of the rearing pond. The vegetation is pretty dense along that shoreline currently. But for this presentation, I'm going to walk through some of the issues that are going on at this site, as well as some of the potential improvements that we could make as part of this project. So starting off, this is the overall concept plan. Again, you can see that rearing pond right in the center here where my cursor is. 7th Avenue is right here. To the north is Alford Park Drive. So some of you might be pretty familiar with this area. And then of course, the Pike River is flowing to the northeast of the rearing pond. The mouth of the river is just off the screen here. So this is upstream of that mouth area. Like Dave mentioned, this project doesn't involve the mouth itself. It's more so this area around the rearing pond. So I'm going to step through each of these ideas for the concept. I'll be kind of flipping back and forth between this concept, so you'll definitely see it again. But I wanted to start off with the bank stabilization, which Dave mentioned is really one of the main focuses of this project. You can see kind of this stone pattern along the edge of the bank, as well as this kind of straight gray line. And these represent different types of bank stabilization. There could potentially be several different types that are needed at this site. And so I'll walk through kind of some of those options. So stream bank erosion threatens the existing infrastructure and reduces water quality. At this location, stream bank erosion is occurring because of the force of the flowing water. In this case, it's the Pike River, and that reduces the bank stability. At this area, the shoreline is progressively getting closer to the rearing pond. Like Dave mentioned, that really threatens the structural integrity of the pond. We've all heard how important the pond is. So stopping that erosion now before it's too late is really important, because that could be a really costly issue in the future if it starts getting super, super close to the pond. In addition, sediment and nutrients entering the stream because of erosion impacts the aquatic habitat. This photo is of the site. You can see there's quite a bit of exposed soil. So as that runoff comes through, that soil then is discharged into the river, and any type of pollutant that is kind of embedded in that soil is then released into the river as well, which greatly impacts the aquatic habitat. So stream bank stabilization aims to minimize this erosion. Like I mentioned, there's many different types of stream bank stabilization options. We just wanted to go through a couple of them that we think could be potential options for this site. The first being a vegetated boulder revetment. This photo is an example of this option. This is actually a site in Brookfield, Wisconsin. And the idea of the vegetated boulder revetment is the stream bank is stabilized with boulders. You can see the boulders in this photo along the edge of the river. The boulders actually extend up the bank as well. They're not just right at the edge of the water. But the reason it's called vegetated boulder revetment is because plantings are meant to come up through those rocks and become kind of more natural, stabilized state. So this certainly could be an option for the site. The next option would be a boulder revetment, which is very similar to a vegetated boulder revetment, but you can probably guess that it's not meant to have that vegetation coming up through the actual boulders. So this certainly is a more kind of armored look, but can definitely help prevent that erosion along the banks. And then lastly, we wanted to talk about the ledge rock system. This is a photo from a stream in Naperville. You can see the ledge rock system is kind of flat stones that form a wall, or could also be stepped down to the water. And then there's cobbles at the bottom of the ledge that just provide additional stability. This river is actually relatively low in this photo. Typically, the water is higher up on the ledge system as shown here. So you typically wouldn't be able to see the cobbles underneath, but we thought it'd be good to kind of show what that system actually looks like. This is just another example of a ledge rock system. You can see that water is coming up to the actual ledge. This one is a bit shorter, and that's just because of the nature of the erosion that was happening. So, all of these stream bank stabilization options need to be tailored to the actual site. And part of this project, we'll be getting cross sections of the current bank, just so we can really analyze what the best option will be. But like I mentioned, it could kind of be a mix of different options depending on what's needed for the site. All right, next aspect of the concept plan we want to talk about is the native prairie restoration, which is also pretty critical to this project. So the green color is what represents the native prairie restoration. So you can see it's pretty much the entire site. As Dave mentioned, there's some issues with invasive species at the site. Invasive species disrupt the native ecosystems by altering the environmental conditions. Invasive species have a lack of natural competitors, which outcompetes the native species. And it just kind of becomes a cycle of outcompeting the natives. And since they don't have any competitors, it can really get out of hand and very difficult to control. In addition, they can transmit disease to native species, which just further perpetuates the issue. So, since there are invasive species on the site, we did want to kind of focus more on some natural vegetation restoration. The native landscaping supports a healthy ecosystem. So it's the opposite of the invasive species. And they do this by providing food and habitat for birds, insects, and other wildlife. It actually also acts as a filter for that polluted runoff. You can see in the diagram on the left, there's a pretty big root system, and that runoff can be filtered through the plants themselves as well as through the root system as it infiltrates. The plantings, because of those root systems, encourage infiltration. And that's really important for stream bank areas because it's good to infiltrate that runoff. So having it seep down into the ground so that it can be treated prior to entering into the river. And then the native landscaping also improves aesthetics. The photo on the right, you can see is a well-maintained native shoreline, and that would be the intent for this project as well. The next element of the concept plan I'll touch on is the porous pavement strip. That's down here by the parking lot that comes off of 7th Avenue. Currently, runoff from the parking lot and roads carries pollutants to water resources, so the Pike River and Lake Michigan. This is a photo of that exact parking lot. You can see there's cars parked along the parking lot and really no barrier for runoff from the parking lot to the river. Pollutants from parking lots and roads include oil, sediments, grease, heavy metals. So currently all of that flows directly to the river and the lake. Additionally, impervious surfaces increase runoff rates and erosion. So, you know, rain that's hitting that parking lot is flowing quickly off the pavement and into the water. And that really kind of just furthers the erosion because that water is flowing over the bank that's already having erosion issues. So to help fix this, the porous pavement filters the pollutants and promotes infiltration so that the stormwater can be filtered through the pavers and the stone storage layers and can infiltrate downwards instead of sheet flowing across the eroding stream bank. The diagram on the bottom left is a typical cross-section of permeable pavers. So the top layer is the pavers itself, which you can see in this photo here. The pavers are separated by joint fill aggregate, and that's actually what the runoff can seep through. And then you'll see several more layers of just different stone, and that acts as kind of a filter for that runoff and then promotes the runoff infiltrating downwards instead of getting to the river directly through sheet flow. Moving on to bioretention basins and rain gardens. So we are showing a bioretention basin here. You can kind of see this oval that's next to the rearing pond. That represents a location for a bioretention basin or rain garden, but certainly there could be other spots on the site that could support something like this. So sheet flow and storm sewers carry pollutants and degrade the shoreline. Currently, these storm sewers carry sediments, oils, heavy metals, trash, bacteria, and fertilizer, everything that Dave kind of already mentioned. And that's an issue because it's carrying all of that directly into the river without any treatment. Additionally, outfalls and sheet flow can erode shorelines. This photo is a photo of an outfall. You can see that runoff really flowing through, and that can kind of scour the ground around the outfall and just kind of perpetuate the eroding issues. Additionally, sheet flow can cause the same issues as I've mentioned before. So sheet flow and storm sewers can be diverted to those bioretention basins or rain gardens. So bioretention basins and rain gardens store and treat the runoff prior to entering the river. There's definitely a theme here of kind of stopping that runoff and allowing it to be treated and infiltrated prior to getting to the water resources. But the plantings in these basins can help filter pollutants, and they can also create habitats because they are native species. And then additionally, runoff is stored and infiltrated instead of getting to the river. The photo on the top here is just an example of some of the plantings that could go in. Like I said, they're native and can definitely improve aesthetics of an area and provide educational opportunities as well. We've seen a lot of these, and some of you might have seen these around, but there's a lot of signage that's associated with rain gardens just to kind of educate the public of the importance of green infrastructure such as this. The diagram on the bottom right is showing a typical cross section. So the top layer is those native plants. That's what you see when you're standing on the ground. But what you don't see is the layers underneath. So the first layer underneath the plantings is what the plants are actually planted in. It's a engineered soil mix. And the reason it's called engineered is because it's specifically designed to filter out those pollutants from the runoff. And then the bottom layer is an aggregate layer that provides storage for the runoff and can further help treat the runoff. And then it helps kind of encourage that infiltration that I've been talking about. And there are potentially some opportunities for us to divert some of the storm sewers on the site into a bioretention basin. Otherwise, utilizing these as capturing sheet flow is another option as well. The next item I will talk about is the hydrodynamic separator. That's shown right here in this gray circle. It's at the end of a 27-inch storm sewer that's flowing into the Pike River. Currently, as you've probably gathered from some of the other slides, but currently untreated storm sewer outfalls are polluting the river and the lake. There's 3 existing storm sewer outfalls on the site, all ranging from 24 inches to 30 inches in diameter. And these sewers carry pollutants and trash from the larger watershed. These are relatively large storm sewer outfalls, so you can imagine they're collecting quite a bit of runoff from the city, and everything that is found on the streets and the parking lots eventually makes its way to these outfalls. And so currently the storm sewers at this site flow to the river with no treatment. So end-of-line treatment options help filter and sediment out and pollutants. So the devices are installed at the end of the storm sewers and help treat that runoff before getting to the river. A couple options for these end-of-line treatments include hydrodynamic separators and baffle manholes, which I'll kind of explain. But all of these devices do require some maintenance. About 2 to 3 times per year, they do need to be cleaned out so that their function is maintained moving forward. But the diagram on the top right is a baffle. The diagram is of a manhole. You can see water entering into the manhole from the left. The baffle, which is a metal plate that runs across the inside of the manhole, slows down that flow and allows for the sediments to kind of settle out. So that the water leaving, which you can see on the right-hand side of the manhole, is cleaner than when it was when it entered in. But you can see kind of why these structures need to be maintained because there is sediment that kind of builds up over time on the bottom of the structure. And then the 2 other photos are showing hydrodynamic separators. These are a bit more complicated than the baffle, but essentially are kind of working towards the same goal. You can see on both of those, there's a trash bag or a trash rack that helps kind of capture some of those larger pollutants. And then there's baffles and walls that are installed in these devices that again slow down that runoff and can allow for particles to settle out. all eventually, you know, the water leaving the other end of the box cleaner than when it entered. All right, next item is kind of moving more into the recreational opportunities that were mentioned previously. First, starting with the fishing / observation area. So we have it placed kind of on the northern edge of the site, but this could certainly be moved to different location, kind of depending on feedback. But right now at the site, the shoreline issues impede fishing access. And this lack of dedicated access promotes illegal fishing. As you've seen from the photos, there's quite a bit of dense vegetation, so it is difficult to see if people are fishing illegally along this stretch. It also creates safety concerns. So if there's no designated area, people will just walk wherever they can. And with kind of the steep slopes of the eroding shoreline, this can definitely be a safety issue. And then lastly, the lack of fishing access leads to environmental degradation. People just kind of walking wherever they want, just kind of creates more erosion, foot traffic. As I'm sure you all know, you've seen kind of footpaths being formed in different locations, but that can definitely further the erosion, especially in an area that's already being eroded by the river. So a fishing pier would provide designated recreational space. It would control that pedestrian foot traffic. If people see a nice fishing pier, they're most likely going to go to that instead of just walking along the shoreline. And therefore, it helps protect the shoreline. It also discourages illegal fishing and improves recreational opportunities. The plan would be for this fishing pier to be ADA accessible as well. And that just improves the overall accessibility of the site. We also wanted to talk about potentially a canoe or kayak launch. On this plan, it's shown as this gray rectangle here. It's connected to the parking lot to just provide people a spot to park their cars and unload their canoes or kayaks. But you know, we can also kind of think about different locations for the canoe launch as well. Right now, the site does not have a controlled canoe or kayak access. The dense vegetation blocks that access. As you can see in this photo, you can kind of barely even see the river. So people definitely aren't putting their boats in through this dense brush. Paddlers from upstream do not have a designated exit point. And again, that uncontrolled foot traffic can increase the bank erosion. So we wanted to talk through some canoe and kayak launch options that would improve the paddler access. So a couple resilient options include steps. That's what's shown in this photo here. So it's just stone steps leading down to the river where people can put in their canoe or kayak at the last step and then step right into their boat. This is definitely a more armored solution and would kind of stand up to some of those forces of the river. A more kind of natural option would be gravel. The most important thing with the gravel launch is to properly anchor in on either side at the river. You can kind of see in this photo that there's larger stones on either side of the launch, and that just holds in the gravel, anchors it in place so that it doesn't need to be replaced as much, and it's not necessarily just wiped away by the river coming through. Next system, which Dave kind of showed a photo of already, is a track system. We've seen these as wood or metal, but essentially paddlers can bring their canoes or kayaks and put the boat in the water down the center track system that you can see there. And then there's steps on each side for people to kind of walk the boats down and get into the water. And then lastly, concrete is also an option. This is kind of more of a traditional boat launch, but it's less of a natural solution, but it is, you know, it would hold up to some of those flows of the river coming through. So we wanted to include it just as a potential option. Lastly, we wanted to talk about the path options. So we're showing two paths here. One is connecting the bike path to the fishing pier, and then the second one is connecting the parking lot to the canoe launch. But this is certainly kind of a working concept, and so there could be paths at different locations as well. But we wanted to come up with a natural option that was still ADA accessible. So one option is a porous pedestrian pathway. This protects the native landscaping and improves accessibility, like I mentioned. This material is a stabilized granite, and it's really cool because it actually looks like gravel. It looks like it would not be accessible, but it's actually quite hard. It strengthens over time. Vehicles can actually drive on these, but it's also porous. So it is kind of a more green solution to just asphalt or pavement. Another option could be porous pavers, porous asphalt, porous concrete, but those are difficult, more difficult to maintain and just require more money, more effort to try to clean over time. So this stabilized granite could be a good option for providing accessibility, but also sticking with the idea of allowing infiltration to happen and kind of protecting the native landscaping and the stream bank. So with that, that is kind of what our concept plan is. And I know we would love to get some input, questions and comments. So I think I'm going to pass it back over to Laura so she can kind of start that session.
Right. Well, thank you, Anna. That's really exciting. I'm really looking forward to seeing how this project progresses, as I'm sure a lot of you are. We welcome you to learn more about this project and many others. We're having an upcoming pollinator picnic on Thursday, September 22nd from 4 to 7, where we will have this information on a project board as well as some others. And I can share more about that later. But right now we wanted to discuss some questions and comments. And I actually did not receive anything right now. So with that being said, would anybody like to ask the presenters a question or have a comment about some of the cool stuff that we heard tonight?
Is it possible you could post this on YouTube so I can share it with our members of the Kenosha Yacht Club?
Absolutely, Mike. I will definitely do that. And let me quick share our YouTube page so that you can save that as well. Anybody else?
Well, I got a question for Dave and Anna for the ones that are listening. You and Strand Associates and Root-Pike WIN have been working together on this. Can you kind of, everybody's just kind of right now in awe of it, but there's a lot of behind the scenes work that Dave has been doing with Anna when we first talked about this. But can you let people know, Dave, what it takes to get money, funding, and all these information? Everybody thinks you write a letter and poof, the money shows up and everybody's just, yay, but it doesn't happen that way. That's why if you guys have a force, can give that information, but along with what kind of timeline is this looking at? Because I know it's all done by writing grants. So that's my question to help us to understand what it takes.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. So there's a lot of different components to this project, which makes it, I think, very fundable overall. How we'll likely get the funding done is through different pieces. So we've got some stormwater pieces, we have some recreational pieces, we have some stream pieces, we have some native plantings. So there's a number of different elements to the project, and ultimately what we would go out and do is look at getting those pieces funded. If there is an opportunity to get kind of a wholesale funding of this project, we would certainly look at that and be all about that. So we don't have to write 5, 6, 7, maybe even 10 different kinds of grants. Those are a little fewer and far between as grantors now have kind of dialed into, you know, some of the specific things they're looking for to fund. So, and we're pretty tuned into which funders are going to fund what, but it's not a given. And so, you know, it's just like the saying goes, nobody cares about what you care about till you care about what they care about. And the translation is, you know, there's stormwater grants out there, and we would chase those stormwater grants for some of these stormwater features, so on and so forth. You know, if you look at everything around the pond, especially the erosion control and the fortifying the banks, I mean, that's kind of the big ticket item. And I would kind of turn it over to Anna to give her perspective on how some of this stuff might get funded.
Yeah, no, Dave, I think you definitely touched on it. I think, like you said, splitting it up might be the route that it needs to go. I know there's a lot of educational grants. There's a lot of surface water grants. You know, being right by Lake Michigan, there's certainly more opportunities for that. So I think just all of the parts put together make this a very fundable project, like you said, Dave.
And like I said, or like we talked about in the beginning, and Anna mentioned as well, the stream bank erosion is the need. Some of these other things are wants. They're going to make the area better. They're going to improve stormwater, improve accessibility, but that shoreline really needs to be fortified. So that would probably be the first thing that we would go after. I think it's probably going to set the stage for the other elements that come along with it. We don't want to put a fishing pier in or a canoe launch and, you know, figure out later on that we should have waited and had, you know, the bank fortification done first. So we think that's the critical path item, and that's probably what we're going to go after first. We might be able to do some of the upland work ahead of time. That's a lower budget kind of item, and I think we could separate some of that from the riparian zone near the river, but that I think still needs to kind of play out. But this is coastal work, and there is a lot of money out there for coastal projects. We just need to line them up.
We have a question from Glenn Warren. He asks, at this time, the rearing pond seems to be somewhat separate from the landscape / water quality work. What has to be done to bring them more interconnected? That's a good question.
Yeah, that is a really good question. I think, you know, definitely the rearing pond structural aspect is certainly different from the kind of overall site plan, but improving kind of the, you know, walking paths around the area and educational signage and things like that, I think will really help pull the site together. Just because, you know, you're right, it does seem like the rearing pond is kind of just separated, but I think through educational signage, you can kind of tell the whole story of the site, and it all goes together. You know, the bank is related to the rearing pond, is related to the native landscaping and all of the green infrastructure, kind of tying that all together by, you know, educational signage and improved access throughout the site. Just the overall aesthetics of the site too. That rendering looks pretty cool of the rearing pond. So we want to kind of make sure the rest of the site is a place that people want to be. I think that's kind of the main thing, is making it all cohesive with the different elements.
And another tidbit on that, I could say this would, and I understand the separation, but first of all, people drive by and see nothing. They don't understand the site. But what I think is important here for and the question there is that you have to bring attention around the area before, so people could know, then get involved. Like, okay, what is this in the middle that everybody's building around this to fortify the banks, and why are we doing this? So what's going to happen? It's kind of an invert, but you need to bring attention to what is happening at the river to understand what's happening with the pond and why it's so important to fortify and do everything first, then do the pond secondary. The pond is a stable, vital project that's runnable. It's running lights out more or less because of the pumps and the wells. But in the long run, what's going to happen around the pond is going to bring more interest and more knowledge, and people are going to want to learn more. So I feel that the first part is the most important part, is to bring knowledge to the area, because everybody walks by there, they drive by there, they see the vegetation, see the growth, nobody pays attention. But when you start fortifying banks, increasing the greenery, the runoff, I think that's going to help grow the pond even more. And I hope I answered that question, or maybe I didn't, but I feel that's, to me, is where it has to come first, is what's happening around the pond.
Yeah, and I would just add to that as well. That's a great question, Glenn. I think the materials that we use, not only for the signage around the area, but the materials that are used to enclose the pond itself, how we treat that area. I mean, we'd like to have it as naturalized as possible. And there's still some conversations, as you know, Glenn, that we're having with regard to what that reef structure is actually going to look like and how big does it need to be. But our goal aesthetically is to kind of meld as much as possible the pond into the natural environment, but still, like Jim said, giving some prominence to the pond and make sure that people know that what's happening there is purposeful, and it's not, it doesn't look like an afterthought. It's a forethought.
Don't see any more questions. I do, if not, and nobody has to do this, but I do have a poll if anybody would like to share what kind of canoe kayak launch they like. There's that one. And if anyone else has a question, feel free to pop that in the chat or come off mute. And then we will be putting this up on our YouTube as well. So I popped that into the chat box for everybody. I'll do that again. We end our, I think we got everybody. Yep. Well, there you go, Anna.
That is very good information.
Okay. I'm going to stop the recording then. Thank you guys all so much for coming. We really appreciate your input and for you to take the time to be here and chat with us. And if you have any questions, I'm going to put our email in here for you. Feel free to reach out anytime. And thank you guys so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Great presentation.